My wife hid her secret debts while I saved for our future, so I took control of all assets and left her financially destroyed. I'm a 32-year-old guy, and I've always believed that hard work and financial responsibility are the backbone of any strong marriage. Growing up, I watched my parents fight over money, and I swore I'd never let that define my relationship. Meeting Jessica in my late 20s felt like a breath of fresh air. She had this magnetic energy, ambition, and a way of making even the mundane feel exciting. From the moment we started dating, I was captivated by how she dreamt big, laughed freely, and made me feel like anything was possible. Within months, we were living together, sketching out plans for our first home, talking about kids, vacations, and a life where money didn't constantly loom over us like a dark cloud. I threw myself into building that life, long hours at the office, late-night side gigs, meticulous budgeting, investing every spare dollar with our future in mind, while she assured me she'd handle her side of the bills. At first, everything felt natural, like a partnership where each of us carried our weight. But subtle things started to creep in. She would dodge questions about payments, forget to pay utilities, and occasionally bristle when I brought up our finances. A credit card statement left on the counter would mysteriously disappear, or she'd claim she already paid it when the envelope was clearly untouched. I ignored these moments at first, chalking them up to stress or forgetfulness, because love, I told myself, meant trust. Still, a tiny knot of unease grew in my chest every time I tried to balance optimism with the nagging doubt. I knew deep down that I was placing faith in her honesty, and yet, I wanted so badly to believe in our vision that I brushed the warning signs aside. Looking back now, I can see how my trust became a double-edged sword. I was building a future, brick by brick, with my own blood, sweat, and sleep-deprived nights, completely unaware that the foundation I thought we shared could soon crumble under a betrayal I didn't even see coming. And then the first real clue appeared. I first noticed the cracks when a small, unopened credit card notice appeared on the kitchen counter. It wasn't addressed to me, but my name was on some of the documents tucked inside, and my stomach sank instantly. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just a forgotten payment or a clerical error. But over the next few weeks, patterns started emerging that I couldn't ignore. There were late-night whispers on the phone when I walked into the room, sudden flinches when I asked about bills, and expenses appearing on our accounts that didn't make sense. Every time I tried to bring it up, Jessica's charm would kick in. "Relax, I've got it under control," she'd say, brushing my concerns aside with a laugh that somehow made me feel guilty for doubting her. I remember sitting at our tiny dining table one evening, staring at the spreadsheets I kept for months, trying to trace every dollar. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" I finally asked, my voice tight. She shrugged, leaning back in her chair, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't think it was a big deal." "You worry too much," she said, and for a moment, I wanted to believe her. But the unease in my chest refused to fade. My friends had noticed my stress. They hinted, subtly at first, then more bluntly, that something wasn't right. I brushed it off, telling myself I was overreacting, that I was letting paranoia poison what should have been a happy home. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the life I was working so hard to build was being quietly dismantled around me. Every shared dream, every long-term plan, suddenly felt precarious, as if the ground beneath us could give way at any moment. And then I stumbled upon the first real piece of evidence that changed everything. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The more I dug, the more I realized that while I was pouring every ounce of energy into building a stable future, Jessica was quietly unraveling it behind my back. Receipts, statements, and online notifications started piling up. Luxury shopping sprees she claimed were necessary, subscriptions I'd never agreed to, and loans I hadn't signed off on but somehow ended up linked to my accounts. The dissonance was maddening, smiling over dinner, planning vacations, and laughing together, while all of this financial chaos quietly festered beneath the surface. I remember sitting on the couch one night, the glow of my laptop illuminating the worry etched into my face, as I whispered to myself, how could someone do this? Every fiber of my being wanted to believe she was capable of honesty, but the evidence kept stacking, undeniable and damning. I tried confronting her gently at first. "Jessica, these charges, where are they coming from?" I asked, my voice tight, trying to hide the panic rising in my chest. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a practiced sigh escaping her lips. "I told you, it's fine. You're overreacting. Just relax," she said, the words meant to soothe, but they only sent a chill down my spine. I could feel my trust eroding with every lie she casually tossed into the air, leaving me anxious and second-guessing everything. Even small things, like missing envelopes or forgotten payments, now felt like part of a bigger, more deliberate pattern. I began to notice other warning signs, subtle but persistent: her defensive tone when I asked about money, her sudden secrecy with emails and calls, and the way she avoided eye contact when I mentioned our savings. The life we were building together, the home, the plans, the sense of security, it all started to feel like a carefully constructed illusion, one I had been laboring to maintain while she quietly chipped away at its foundation. And then I discovered the first undeniable proof that this wasn't just mismanagement, it was deliberate. The day I found out about the loans, my world tilted on its axis. Jessica had taken out multiple loans in my name, loans I never signed, loans I didn't even know existed. I remember staring at the paperwork on the kitchen counter, my hands shaking, my mind racing through every late-night shift, every saved paycheck, every sacrifice I'd made for our future. "Jessica, what is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the anger and disbelief tangled together. She looked at me, blinking, then shrugged. "I didn't think it would be a big deal. I was going to tell you, eventually." The casualness of her words hit me like a punch to the gut, as if she didn't understand the gravity of what she had done. I felt a cold pit form in my stomach, that sinking realization that the life I'd built with care and trust was now under immediate threat. Every plan, every dream, suddenly felt fragile and precarious. My mind went in circles, credit ruined, bills piling up, my name tied to debt I didn't accrue. I remember pacing the living room, the hum of the fridge and the ticking clock mocking my sense of security. It wasn't just money, it was betrayal on a scale I hadn't prepared for. When I confronted her again, my voice sharper, "How could you do this? All those bills, all those loans, how did you think I wouldn't find out?" She looked away, voice soft but defensive. I said I was sorry. I didn't want to burden you yet. But her words were hollow, rehearsed, and I could see the truth lurking behind them. The person I loved and trusted had systematically hidden a storm that could destroy everything we'd built together. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just financial irresponsibility, it was a deliberate, calculated betrayal. After discovering the loans, I started noticing all the other ways she'd been hiding her financial mess from me. Friends and family began dropping hints too, subtle comments that I initially brushed off. "Are you sure she's being honest about money?" Or, "It seems like she's hiding something." I hated that I had to even consider their warnings, but deep down, I could feel the unease settling into my chest. I remember sitting alone on our balcony one night, city lights flickering below, thinking about every late-night shift, every careful deposit, and every plan I'd made for our future. How could someone I trusted so completely live a secret life that threatened everything I worked for? Every confrontation with her turned into a battle of words, a performance of innocence on her part and growing frustration on mine. "You don't understand, it's complicated," she would insist, pacing back and forth, voice rising in a way that made me tense every muscle. I tried to stay calm, documenting everything, cross-checking accounts, and keeping track of statements that contradicted her reassurances. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me. I was supposed to be building a life, a home, a future, but now it felt like I was navigating a minefield I didn't even know existed. The tension at home was palpable. Even ordinary moments, like making coffee or watching TV, were undercut by suspicion, the quiet dread of what I might uncover next. Every small clue, the vanishing envelopes, secretive phone calls, unexplained withdrawals, made me question whether any of the smiles or plans had ever been real. I began realizing that the deeper I dug, the more I saw a web of deception I hadn't imagined existed. And then, one night, I stumbled upon something that completely confirmed my worst fears. That night, I uncovered the full extent of her deception, and my stomach dropped like a stone. Tens of thousands of dollars in secret debt, multiple fraudulent accounts opened in my name, and loans I never authorized, all meticulously hidden from me. I sat at the dining table, fluorescent light glaring down, staring at spreadsheets and statements that confirmed what I had feared. This wasn't just forgetfulness or poor planning. It was deliberate. She had been living beyond our means at my expense, quietly siphoning off the life I was working so hard to build. When I confronted her, I expected tears or remorse. Instead, she became defensive, her voice sharp and calculated. I didn't think it would matter now. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said, and the charm I had fallen for seemed like a mask I'd finally ripped away. The realization hit me like ice. The person I had trusted most, the woman I believed I was building a life with, had planned this deception carefully from the start. My chest tightened, heart racing, as anger, betrayal, and disbelief collided inside me. Everything I had worked for, our savings, our future, my credit, was at risk because of her manipulation. I felt isolated, even in the home we shared. The walls seemed smaller, the air heavier. Friends' warnings replayed in my mind, and I kicked myself for ignoring the early signs, for believing in her assurances over evidence. I knew that if I didn't act, she would continue chipping away at everything I had earned. And in that moment, as the reality settled like a storm cloud over me, I realized I needed a plan, a way to reclaim control, before the life I'd built was completely destroyed. I hit my lowest point a few nights later, sitting alone in the darkened living room, the hum of the city outside feeling suffocating. Every scenario I ran through in my head ended the same way: lost savings, ruined credit, and the realization that the woman I loved had systematically betrayed me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw spreadsheets, bills, and loan notices flashing before me like a cruel slideshow. I felt trapped, like I was suffocating in the life I thought I was building, and the despair was almost physical, a weight pressing down on my chest. I remember whispering to myself, how could someone do this to me? How could she be so calculating? Even friends' attempts to comfort me couldn't break the isolation. Their words, "You need to protect yourself and this isn't your fault," felt like distant echoes, unable to penetrate the growing panic. Every familiar sound in the apartment, the fridge humming, the radiator ticking, the faint creak of floorboards, felt like reminders of her deception. I realized that the woman I trusted implicitly had turned my own life against me, and the foundation of our marriage had been a lie from the start. It was in that dark, suffocating moment that I decided I couldn't stay a passive victim. I couldn't let this betrayal define me or destroy everything I had worked for. From that rock bottom, I began to formulate a plan, a careful, calculated response that would protect my assets and reclaim control over my life. And as I sat there, staring at the papers scattered across the coffee table, I knew that the next move would change everything, for both of us. After hitting that rock bottom, I knew I had to stop spiraling and start taking control. I began quietly consulting lawyers and financial experts, trying to understand exactly how much damage had been done, and how I could protect myself. Every evening, I would sit at our dining table, laptop open, tracking every account, every debt, every transaction she had tried to hide. I collected documents, screenshots, statements, and correspondence, building a detailed record of her deception, all while she carried on acting normal. The juxtaposition was surreal, she laughing in the kitchen, making dinner, completely unaware that I was preparing for a confrontation that would leave her accountable for every hidden lie. I felt a strange mix of anger and empowerment, knowing that I was finally turning the tables in a situation where I had felt powerless for so long. It wasn't easy. Every time I saw her smiling, I reminded myself of the stakes, forcing myself to stay calm and precise rather than letting anger dictate my actions. I mapped out the sequence of moves, securing assets under my name, confirming every debt was documented, and preparing a strategy that would leave her financially responsible for everything she had done. I knew timing would be crucial. One wrong step, and she could hide, manipulate, or complicate the situation further. The adrenaline of planning, of reclaiming control, was almost intoxicating, a stark contrast to the hopelessness I'd felt just weeks before. I also started thinking about the emotional side, how to confront her in a way that exposed the truth fully, without letting her deflect or manipulate me. Every decision I made was calculated, deliberate, and patient. I was no longer the man blindsided by trust, I was a strategist, preparing for the moment when the consequences would finally land. And as I closed my laptop that night, I realized the confrontation that would change everything was closer than she could ever imagine. The day I confronted her, I felt a mixture of dread and anticipation like nothing I'd experienced before. I laid everything out on the dining table: statements, loan documents, screenshots, and spreadsheets that proved beyond a doubt how deep her deception ran. She walked in, her smile faltering the instant she saw the pile of evidence, but for a moment, she tried to keep up the act. "What is all this?" she asked, voice trembling, though her eyes were wide with panic. I didn't flinch. "You know exactly what this is, Jessica. Every loan, every credit card, every expense you tried to hide from me, everything." Her face went pale, the charm and casual deflection she had relied on evaporating in an instant. She started to stammer, attempting to gaslight me, saying it wasn't as bad as it looked, that I was overreacting, that she didn't mean to hurt me. But I held my ground, voice calm, precise, almost cold. "The truth is here. The evidence doesn't lie. And I've taken steps to secure everything under my name. You are responsible for every debt, every lie, every deception." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, and I watched as the reality of her actions finally sank in. For the first time, I felt a sense of power, a reclaiming of control that had been ripped from me over months of betrayal. I could see the panic, the fear, the helplessness that mirrored everything I had felt in those sleepless nights, but now it was hers. And I knew, without saying another word, that nothing could undo the consequences she had brought upon herself. And in that quiet, tense moment, I realized the next steps would not just be legal, they would be final, absolute, and irreversible. Once the confrontation was over, the consequences rippled outward faster than I expected. Friends, family, even colleagues began noticing the tension, and slowly, the truth started to surface. Jessica's attempts to spin the story fell apart as statements, documents, and witnesses corroborated everything I had uncovered. I remember sitting in the living room, listening as messages and phone calls poured in, realizing that the deception she had thought she could hide for so long was finally exposed to everyone who mattered. The relief was almost dizzying. Seeing people I trusted finally understand the extent of her betrayal was like a weight lifting from my chest. She tried to charm her way out, to cast doubt on my version of events, but the evidence was irrefutable. Every excuse she made, every tear she tried to produce, fell flat against the mountain of proof I had meticulously gathered. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the cracks forming in the confident mask she always wore. Friends who had warned me months ago quietly nodded, their unspoken validation almost as satisfying as the legal and financial control I had regained. The apartment, once heavy with secrets and tension, now felt lighter, almost liberating, as I realized I was no longer under her manipulation. Even small moments, her pacing, her stammering explanations, the way she avoided my gaze, felt like an affirmation that justice, in its own way, was unfolding. And yet, despite the relief, I knew the final chapter wasn't complete. The next step would cement accountability, leaving no room for her to twist or escape the consequences. And in that tense, charged silence, I prepared for the ultimate closure that would change everything. After the fallout, I finally had space to breathe, to think, and to start rebuilding both financially and emotionally. I secured my accounts, repaired my credit, and made sure every asset I had worked for was fully protected. The relief of knowing I was no longer at the mercy of her deception was immense, but it came with its own challenges: processing the betrayal, the sleepless nights, and the crushing weight of everything I had endured. I started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I needed to untangle the mess of emotions she had left behind. "You did what you had to do," my counselor said, and hearing it aloud helped me finally let go of the guilt I'd been carrying for trusting her. I also focused on rebuilding trust, with myself, my friends, and anyone I allowed back into my life. Every decision became intentional, measured, and informed by the lessons I'd learned. The house, once a battlefield of secrets and manipulation, slowly became a place of clarity and calm. I reflected on the experience often, understanding how easily charm and false reassurance can mask deliberate betrayal. For the first time in months, I felt empowered, not through revenge, but through control, knowledge, and resilience. Even mundane moments, like sipping coffee in the quiet morning light or checking our now stable accounts, carried a weight of satisfaction and closure. I realized that betrayal had tested me to the core, but emerging on the other side meant I had not only survived but learned to thrive. And as I looked forward, I knew that the final chapter, the ultimate resolution of accountability, was just around the corner. The final resolution came quietly but with absolute clarity. Legally and financially, I had secured everything, all accounts, investments, and assets were under my name, leaving Jessica fully responsible for the debts she had hidden. I remember the day she realized the consequences were irreversible. Her panic, her pleading, and the hollow attempts to explain herself were powerless against the evidence I had meticulously gathered. "It's over," I said calmly, watching the fear in her eyes, knowing that no charm, no lies, and no manipulation could undo what she had done. The satisfaction wasn't in cruelty, it was in justice, in reclaiming control over my life and seeing accountability finally land. Emotionally, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for months. The betrayal had cut deep, but the careful steps I had taken to protect myself and expose the truth gave me a sense of empowerment I hadn't imagined possible. I reflected on how easily trust can be exploited, but also on how patience, diligence, and strategy could turn the tables on someone who thought they could manipulate everything. For the first time, I could breathe freely in my own home, walk confidently into my future, and know that I was untouchable to her deception. Even small victories, seeing her scramble with creditors, watching friends and family recognize the truth, and reclaiming nights of uninterrupted sleep, felt monumental. The pain, betrayal, and sleepless nights had led to this moment, a turning point where I was not just surviving but thriving. I had learned the hard way that love and trust are precious, but vigilance, preparation, and courage are what protect them. And as I closed that chapter, I finally felt it, the calm, quiet power of someone who had endured betrayal, reclaimed their life, and emerged stronger than ever.